When we last met a year ago, I think everybody here would say that the charge of collusion was unfounded, but we didn't have an official pronouncement on that. And since we last met a year ago, we have had the Mueller report, in which a 2-year investigation could not establish that any coordination or conspiracy, those are the words that they used, took place between Russia and the Trump campaign, which reached no conclusion on whether the president obstructed justice in this matter, although it really hinted heavily that he had, but the Justice Department said otherwise. So we've now had a lot happen in the past year since we last talked about this. And what's happening now, I think that's perhaps most important, is we're all waiting for the release of the Justice Department Inspector General's report, the so-called Horowitz report. And now we also know that John Durham, who is a U.S. attorney in Connecticut, is looking into the broader beginnings of the Trump-Russia matter. So it appears that the Trump-Russia matter will, now in its 3rd year, or 4th year, is going to go even farther. So first of all, I'd like to start out with Congressman Nunes and ask, as we wait for this Horowitz report, as we wonder what Durham is doing, where does it actually stand right now?
Well, it's a little bit, remember the old movie Groundhog Day? That's been my life for the last 3 years. Every day I wake up, and a year ago we were here, sitting in the same chairs. Look, I think we're a long way down the road. If people do not, first of all, we have to have a full accountability, and then people have to be held accountable. If not, you're going to have generations of Americans who are not going to not only trust the Department of Justice, they're not going to trust the intelligence agencies. And that's a real dangerous place for this country to be in if that happens. So I have a lot of confidence in where the investigation is now. We've made several criminal referrals. Chuck Grassley's made several criminal referrals.
Do you feel those are being paid attention to, or do they just go in the round file at the Justice Department, or what?
No, I think they're being paid attention to because obviously, even if you take, all the news in its totality, which we can talk about how much of that is real versus fake, but it looks to me like they're going to the right places, talking to the right people, and they're building a case would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. Ken?
Well, it's a time of anticipation, time of waiting. Let me begin by saying, is this a great conference or what? Come on, is this a great conference? And it's great to be back with, I still call the Congressman Mr. Chairman in exile. So I have total confidence in Bill Barr. I served with Bill Barr. He was head of the Office of Legal Counsel when I was privileged to serve as Solicitor General. And then he became my boss as the Attorney General of the United States when Dick Thornburgh, you all remember Dick Thornburgh, governor of Pennsylvania, was wooed by the White House, the siren song, "Oh, you could waltz into the United States Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body, other than the House Intelligence Committee, and you can be elected to the United States Senate, so why don't you step?" And it was so ironic. Dick Thornburgh absolutely loved being the Attorney General of the United States, and he was defeated by Harris Wofford. Do you remember Harris Wofford? Who really hadn't had a real election in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That I digress. I reported to Bill Barr. I saw him in action. He is a person of rock-ribbed integrity. He is extremely smart, and he does not suffer fools. So if you're going to mess with him, congressperson or senator, whoever you are, you're going to have a formidable opponent. And we're in very good hands because he is, I think, I've not talked to him at all, but knowing him and having served with him for those 4 years under President Bush 41, Byron, I have every confidence that he will get to the bottom of it through John Durham. But it appears that he's personally and substantially involved himself in some of the interviews and fact-finding, whether that's a wise judgment or not, but it does, I think, assure the American people, those who love the truth, you shall know the truth shall set you free, that Bill Barr is determined to get to the truth. I also would say we should continue to have great confidence in Mr. Horowitz, whom I don't know. You have dealt with him, but you certainly know him, Mr. Chairman, and he has an impeccable reputation. And I must say, when I've seen indications, including from someone who I greatly admire, Senator Grassley, that perhaps the deep state is getting its hands on the report, I would say be comforted, be assured. That will not happen, I don't think. Famous last words on Michael Horowitz's watch, who does report to the Attorney General of the United States. I mean, he does have a position, even though he's independent, within the Department of Justice. So I think the point is our constitutional framework is filled with checks and balances. Karl Rove spoke very wisely and eloquently to that. Those checks and balances, and it's frustrating, but we're going to get the truth.
We see the Attorney General traveling the world. We saw him go to Italy. And I think a number of people, maybe who are not deep in the weeds of the Trump-Russia thing, think, why is he in Italy?
Well, you keep calling it a matter and a thing. It was a hoax, Byron. And the reason that he would be in Italy, and they have not shared why they went to Italy with me, but it's fairly obvious. The hoax all began with a guy named George Papadopoulos. That's what they used to open the counterintelligence investigation in July of 2016. The key person in this was a guy named Joseph Mifsud, and do all of you know who Mifsud is, or do you most? Well, don't. I don't.
This
want
is
to
your
embarrass
test to see how
Yeah.
deep in the weeds you really are about this. How many Joseph Mifsud?
So I don't want to embarrass those of you who don't know Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud is born in Malta. He was a longtime Maltese diplomat. In the last decade, 15 years ago or so, he started working at a campus in Rome, where he did a variety of different things, but including this campus would host our own FBI, our own State Department, members of NATO. Joseph Mifsud has been one of these guys that's been around the circuit in Europe in these national security conferences. He is the one that supposedly, I think he actually denies it, but supposedly told Papadopoulos that there were emails, Hillary Clinton emails, and that the Russians had them. Well, this Joseph Mifsud, even as early as 2017, when we were beginning our investigation on the House Intelligence Committee, Joseph Mifsud was literally steps away from our committee because he was at a conference sponsored by an association that works with the State Department, where he flew into the United States and attended this conference. So you had wild accusations by James Comey that Joseph Mifsud is a Russian agent. Mueller didn't go there. Mueller used this little weasel term in his report, I believe he said that Mifsud had Russian contacts. Well, I think all of us, I'm sure you have Russian contacts, I have Russian contacts. Byron, you probably have Russian contacts.
I'm clean, I think.
Byron's never been to Russia, I guess.
Correct.
You've never spoke to a Russian. So you would think if you take the unprecedented step of opening up an investigation, counterintelligence investigation, which the judge can get into the difference in why a counterintelligence investigation is so different, but this is supposed to protect us, right? This is supposed to go after terrorists and spies and things of that nature. Well, they opened this investigation into the Trump campaign and their associates, and they used Papadopoulos as the key to turn on the investigation. So you would think after we spent $35 million on the special counsel, After we went through, and the House Intelligence Committee, we did our investigation. We could never get the answers about Mifsud. This guy has not been found. Nobody knows what happened to him. Now, are you telling me that with our 17 agencies that we have that are intelligence agencies in the United States of America, we can't find this guy? So it's just not believable. He is where, if you're, you don't have to be a rocket scientist and been a longtime investigator to know, well, we're concerned about Hillary Clinton's emails and why this guy would have them. This is the original guy that we opened the investigation on. We probably ought to figure out who the hell this Mifsud guy is. Mm-hmm. Never happened. So my guess is that's what they were doing in Rome.
All right. So you raised an interesting issue, which is, until the 2018 election, you were the chairman of the committee. You're a Republican. There was a Republican administration. You were trying to get information out of the Republican-headed Justice Department on several things that happened in this FBI investigation, and you were getting stonewalled. This is not the normal course of events when one party controls the House and the executive branch. It was more like if there were a Democratic Justice Department and you were trying to get information out of them and they said, forget it. You faced this resistance from a Republican Justice Department.
Right, and remember how they set this up, right? They were very clever in how they orchestrated all of this, right? Because when you put the president under investigation, okay, it made it very difficult then, any move that we would make, trying to get to the bottom of the Russia collusion issue, we would be hamstrung when we would go to DOJ and say, well, there's an ongoing investigation, so they wouldn't want to give us information. You take on top of that McCabe, who was the deputy director of the FBI, and even his associates have now bragged that they weren't going to give me information because they thought that I was communicating with the Trump administration. Now, I was very careful never to communicate with the Trump administration, but I want to know why McCabe and his associates aren't being investigated for obstruction of justice of our investigation. And so they were withholding this information from us on purpose, and there was no, if you remember, there was no attorney general effectively because Sessions had recused. So the president couldn't order it. Sessions wasn't there, and then you have all these guys that are sitting there that are essentially trying to catch House Republicans in obstruction of justice traps.
Wow. Let me ask Judge Starr a broader question, which is in the 2016 election, we had both major party candidates were under investigation by the FBI. Now, maybe we just had two sketchy candidates, or maybe the FBI was going too far into politics. And you remember there's been a lot of debate. The Republicans are criticizing fine men and women in the FBI. Well, obviously the FBI does many great things in stopping crime all around the country, but there does appear to have been a highly politicized group at the very top that ended up investigating both major party candidates in a presidential election. How did that happen?
Well, it's very unhealthy, and it comes down to leadership and the integrity of the leadership. In fairness to the Bureau, if information that's substantial and credible comes to them, they can't ignore it. And so you have the issues of the Hillary Clinton violation, blatant violation in terms of the server and so forth, the danger to classified information. Then you have what we need to get to the bottom of, and which we will get to the bottom of, and that's the Russian collusion farce. So you need someone at the FBI, the head of the FBI, with the integrity of a Louis Freeh or a Bill Webster, but also its judgment. Is this something that we should be looking into? And when you're talking about a presidential election, it is very important that the FBI be, as it were, the Caesar's spouse test. You've got to be above suspicion, given your mighty powers. Lord Acton, power corrupts. And so we had someone at the head of the FBI, James Comey, who we now know lacked judgment. He may have lacked integrity as well. There's growing evidence that he did lack integrity, but I'm not going to cast that stone until we know more through the Horowitz report and the Durham analysis and so forth. But it appears to me that we had someone who really had such poor judgment, as illustrated by his press conferences, which, whether it had a clear and present effect on the campaign at all, is something that should not have been done. Going out and making announcements with respect, and the FBI just should not be doing this, especially then going the extra mile and asserting powers that he did not have, saying that a prosecution would not be brought, and then 2 weeks before the election reopening the investigation. All this was, as we say, ultra vires. That means he was acting beyond his power. And what does that mean? It means he had very, very questionable judgment. So I think judgment and integrity go to the core of why it is that you could have a wonderful institution. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is a wonderful institution, go badly off the tracks.
During the transition, the president-elect had a number of advisors who were advising him to fire James Comey immediately. Like, take the oath of office, step down, fire Comey, step back up, and deliver the inaugural address. Do it really, really fast. And he didn't do it. And did he make a mistake by not firing Comey on day one?
Profoundly so, because it was the right thing to do in light of the fact that, but I really want to defer to the chairman on this, because you watch the politics of it, but I was appalled as a citizen sitting in beautiful Waco, Texas, and Alice and I are watching what's unfolding in the campaign, and of course we have no idea of who's going to win. We knew the president would carry Texas, but what's going to happen in this game? And then here is Jim Comey, the head of the FBI, and I don't know Jim Comey, I've never met him, and certainly I've never served with him, under him, et cetera. But here's Jim Comey doing these really outlandish things, and so yes, he had grounds, and the president knows how to fire people, and he should have indeed fired him right away. Instead, he tried to cultivate him, and that redounded, right, to his profound detriment, because Comey then, and the Mueller report, then, I think very unfairly to the president, makes it look as if he's obstructing justice. So Jim Comey was a very unfortunate figure to keep around, and a very powerful position.
I would just add this, that to have an FBI director, just think about this, that has an anonymous Twitter account while he's FBI director, that's all I got to say. It's a little odd.
I want to go.
No offense to Pierre Delecto.
Pierre Delecto.
Which is also weird, by the way.
I think that's I think that account is locked now, by the way. There are more parody accounts, like Pierre Defecto, than there are the original account. Now, I want to ask kind of a big picture question that I think a lot of people probably wonder about. We have all of these collusion allegations. We have these investigations, one after the other. Your investigation in the House, the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, the special counsel Robert Mueller investigation. It's just all this goes on, and we hear Russia, Russia, Russia for 2 years. And basically it all kind of comes to a halt in the summer of 2019, and then wham, we're off to the races with Ukraine. And this is the biggest thing in the world now, and it's Trump-Ukraine, and forget about the Russia stuff, we didn't really mean it. Now it's Ukraine, which is everything. How did this happen?
Well, we won't be able to get to the bottom of that until we are able to interview the whistleblower. That's going to be the key to putting this all together. But what it appears like, if you remember, after the Mueller report bombed for the Democrats, they've just poisoned the minds of so many millions of Americans that many are innocent in this, but once you've poisoned the minds of people, it's hard to walk this back. Remember, so they've said that they first had more than circumstantial evidence of collusion, meaning the Democrats, and they were out there every single day. Then you had, Mueller was going to bring the goods. That didn't happen. And even after Mueller, even after that totally bombed for them, despite, I call it the Mueller dossier, because if you read it, it's like 400 pages. It looks like Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson had a hand in writing the Mueller dossier too. Because it's Russia's bad, there's all these Russia contacts, but at the end of the day, there were no Russians in the Mueller report. So after that, the Democrats on the what is now the impeachment committee, formerly the Intelligence Committee, they were able to continue this, and they were looking more and more ridiculous. So, now if you believe the press reports, it's clear that staffers are close associates of all of these people who are claiming this Ukraine hoax issue. The fact that we can't interview the whistleblower makes it impossible. It's kind of like not being able to find Joseph Mifsud, right? Mifsud has the emails. Mifsud knows about the emails. Well, this whistleblower knows things that just aren't so. And I think what happened is that when the president released the transcript, it really blew up their half-baked plan.
And Adam Schiff, and by the way, we have a question about Adam Schiff coming from the audience, originally said that the Intelligence Committee had to interview the whistleblower, but they were worried about what Republicans might do, perhaps to expose the whistleblower, so they were going to take extraordinary measures to protect the whistleblower's identity, perhaps have them either behind a screen or from a remote room with a scrambled voice, so you would not be able to recognize the voice. So they're making these rather elaborate plans, and now they drop them entirely. They say, we're not going to hear from the whistleblower at all. We don't need to. And now it's Republicans who are saying, we must hear from the whistleblower. So how did Schiff go from we have to do this and we're going to, build a special room to have the whistleblower testify to, we don't need this at all?
It's really easy. The media assets, the media are just assets of the Democratic Socialist Party. No offense, Byron, but that's really what they are. So
I'm clean again.
So Schiff and Pelosi know this, which is why every day there's a new bombshell. And if you compare, and I think Lee Smith, who has a book coming out next week, he does a really good job. It's a lot about what Republicans did to get to the bottom of the Russia hoax. But in addition to that, he calls out the members of the media who were essentially just acting as mouthpieces and narrative builders. Guess what? The same reporters that were all involved in the Russia hoax are doing the exact same thing with the Ukrainian hoax. So it's, like I said, it's Groundhog Day. It's just, they just changed the titles, right? We went from Russia to Ukraine. And so the media is the one that's letting them get away with this. Look, think about it. The media knows who the whistleblower is. The only people who don't know who the whistleblower is are the American people and Republicans. The Democrats know, and virtually every media outlet in America knows who this whistleblower is.
And speaking to the judge here, the whistleblower law, which I went and read, gives very limited protections to a whistleblower. It basically says that it applies only to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, who it says cannot reveal the name of the whistleblower unless he determines that disclosure of the name is unavoidable in the course of things. You would think that a presidential impeachment would be unavoidable. So is there a reason to continue to protect the identity of this person?
Only political and not legal. You're absolutely right. The whistleblower statute is important, but it's very limited. It does not give a permanent anonymity bath to the whistleblower.
It doesn't apply to Congress, right?
No, it does not. This is just to
Doesn't apply to
protect
me.
within. Think of it from a corporate perspective. You have a whistleblower within the corporation, right? And you have some mechanism. You go to the general counsel, you've got an ombudsperson, you go to HR, wherever you go within the corporation, right? You say, well, we've got to protect that person. Why? Because his or her supervisor is going to come after him, presumptively. At least that's the danger. So it's all an internal kind of device to protect the whistleblower. It's not to protect the whistleblower from the American people or from the representatives of the American people.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think that's the key point here is that we know of at no time in history where a whistleblower came forward officially, through the channels like this whistleblower did, and one party doesn't get to know who it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's not forget, the other party coached the whistleblower. I mean, think about that for a second.
Mm-hmm. Now, Democrats would say that the whistleblower's testimony is not needed because the rough transcript that was released of the telephone call basically corroborates what the whistleblower said. So they have this better evidence, which is the president's own words. And how do you respond to that?
Well, they always do the same thing, which is they just repeat something over and over and over again, and they hope that everybody just says that it's true. The fact of the matter is that, just going back to if you really want to get into quid pro quo and all of that, well, there's no evidence of that. I mean, you know what evidence is. No one's provided any evidence, including the whistleblower himself, by his own admission. If you look at what he wrote, he had no firsthand knowledge of this. And if you take, I can't talk about and give you, verbatim quotes out of these depositions that have been occurring in the secret Starr chamber down in the Capitol.
Yeah, you can talk about it. Come on.
But the bottom line is this: there's still no evidence that any of these people have, other than they're just mad bureaucrats that didn't like that they were being circumvented by the EU ambassador Sondland and the special envoy Volker, Secretary Perry, and Rudy Giuliani. And I always say this, and I'm not sure, maybe they just don't say it enough. Maybe they should say it more. But you have to remember that the origins of the Russia probe begin in Ukraine. Okay, so many of the sources for the Steele dossier. You guys all know what the Steele dossier is. That was the art that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid to be done by getting information from foreigners, supposedly, and then feeding it into the FBI to open up the counterintelligence investigation. Now, I would want my lawyer, if I was being attacked like this and I knew origins of the investigation began in Ukraine, I would want my lawyer and a bunch of other lawyers and investigators in Ukraine trying to figure out who the hell are these people. So Rudy Giuliani had every right and a responsibility to his client to be in Ukraine trying to figure out who these Ukrainians are. And if you look back, Ukraine, and you need to really look at this, I think this is not being covered by the media. Ukraine did something very interesting in the 2016 election that I don't think there's a history of a country doing it. Ukraine really did meddle in the U.S. election with many of their high-level officials. Okay, one of their, if you look at their ambassador to the United States, wrote an op-ed in one of the newspapers in August of 2016, attacking Trump as a candidate. You had numerous other officials that had publicly attacked Trump as a candidate. Okay, I mean, this is really almost unprecedented for a country to have high-ranking officials that would say things about a candidate and get themselves involved in a U.S. election. So the bottom line is that Rudy Giuliani had every right to be over in Ukraine trying to dig up whoever these Ukrainians were and who they were talking to and what dirt they were giving to the Democrats and how that dirt made its way to the FBI.
I'm going to start with a question here from the audience, which is, I will read it verbatim. Practically speaking, what can be done about Adam Schiff's outrageous conduct? Your colleague, Adam Schiff.
Yeah. So practically speaking, you know, he's the chair, so he controls what happens in the whole process. The question's going to be going down the road is if they do move forward to impeachment. This is a deemed impeachment, right? We have no jurisdiction. House Intelligence Committee has no jurisdiction over impeachment traditionally. So Pelosi's just deemed it as Schiff and 2 other committees. And this impeachment Starr chamber is operating without rules, okay? Because every committee has rules. The Congress has rules, and these committees have rules. So she deemed it an impeachment inquiry, okay? And we only have a couple instances in the past on impeachment. I know you're going to talk about it later. So as long as they're making the rules and they have 218 votes, there's very little we can do. We tried to censure him last week, but it failed. It was tabled. But there's nothing legally we can do because the House majority rules in the House.
Well, Ken, if you look, I've had so many people say to me, how can they have this impeachment without holding a vote, without formally declaring one like they did with Bill Clinton, starting an inquiry like they did with Richard Nixon? But if you look at the Constitution, it basically says the House shall choose its Speaker and have sole authority over impeachment. And that's it. It seems to me that they have enormous latitude to do what they want.
And ultimately, it's a good thing. We don't want judges issuing orders to the House of Representatives saying, here's how you'll conduct impeachment. So it is entirely entrusted by the Constitution to the House of Representatives. Now, I talked about this yesterday. Bob Bork had the great Judge Bork, had a great formulation. He called it, the action isn't unconstitutional, but it's anti-constitutional. It goes against the traditions, here the history, and that's what's happened. And it's been very beautifully laid out. Leader McCarthy yesterday laid it out as to just the enumeration. His bill of particulars was very, very powerful with respect to the anti-constitutional nature of it, but it is a political question. So I know it's very frustrating, and all we have are our voices. Let our members of Congress know we care about this issue. You say, well, that's pretty empty and hollow. Yes, but you can't go to court. It's as simple as that.
So there is no remedy other than just a political remedy, which is to put pressure on elected representatives or ultimately through an election. That's
well, ultimately, if they want to impeach, there will have to be a vote. And then
that's old thinking.
And then, well, there will have to actually impeach, they will have to
yes.
vote. So, and I'm not sure they've thought about the second and third and fourth hand consequences of this, because ultimately, if they do impeach, and they almost have to because they've poisoned the minds of so many of Americans, then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate will have a real trial. And if done even halfway normally, they're going to look really bad because there will be no evidence. And so I think they're taking a huge risk by impeaching and throwing this to the Senate, where you would then have a real trial.
But, Ken, if I remember the Clinton impeachment correctly, the House went ahead, the Republican House went ahead and impeached the president. And there were a number of people in the Republican-controlled Senate who said, forget it. It's not going to happen. You can send it over here. There's no way in the world we're going to convict this president, so just knock it off. House did what it wanted. The Senate did what it wanted. Right. That's how it works.
That's our Constitution. Judges shouldn't be telling the Senate how to run its operations as well. The text of the Constitution, however, contemplates a trial. Now, we've heard Senator Lindsey Graham, the chairman, who I love, say, let's just dismiss this because of all these procedural flaws, the procedural irregularities, including the historic, colossal failure to hold a vote of the full House. So you were disenfranchised. And most members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, were disenfranchised by the speaker's power grab and just anointing and saying, okay, this is now impeachment. It's no longer an oversight hearing. I believe this is functionally an oversight hearing, or a set of oversight hearings that's masquerading as impeachment. But they have the broad authority to do it. But they're sowing seeds, and they may reap the whirlwind. It's going to be, I think, very embarrassing. I hope it will be, because it should be, when Lindsey Graham does, in fact, move to dismiss. Now, I don't think it should be dismissed, even for all these procedural irregularities, but it makes, I think, a very interesting conversation for at least a few days to say, United States senators, hopefully we can get a Joe Manchin to say, I really don't like the way the House conducted itself. How about Doug Jones? We have some good folks from Alabama here. Let's put the pressure on some of those, hopefully, fair-minded Democrats, like a Joe Manchin, to say, I disagree with what happened, but now let's proceed with the trial. And then the president, I'm going to jump ahead and say, the president needs to have a superb trial team to take. Here's what my colleague Mark Lanier said. You annihilate the witnesses on the other side. You annihilate them. You love them. But it's as Baylor coach Grant Taft said, gentlemen, Christian charity begins after the game.
Love but annihilate. Congressman, I have a question. We're seeing daily these people being interviewed by either the Intelligence Committee or the Oversight Committee or the Foreign Affairs Committee, and they're doing it down in this super duper secret room in the Capitol that's designed to be impervious to electronic surveillance and all sorts of other things. And you've been in a number of these actual sessions. What's it like?
Well, it's just, we don't have, Starr Chamber has its origins in Old England. And I mean, it really is kind of that way. We have a big table, and the witness comes in and sits at the front. Schiff sits on one side, I sit on the other. We have the general counsels on each side. And then then they just continue, they ask questions for an hour, and then we go for an hour. And then they ask the same questions over and over and over again until the 6 o'clock news time. And then they run out and say, bombshells today, we have to impeach. That's what happens every day.
And that's why you call it the Groundhog Day impeachment. And there is a stenographer in there?
Yes, and that's another irregularity in all of this. So not only do we not have the whistleblower complaint, we no longer can have access to the transcripts, which is why I've said publicly that we need to make sure that we keep these tapes, because everything's recorded. We need to make sure that we keep these tapes, because it's also unprecedented not to give. Typically, the stenographers will take the information, they'll produce an early transcript of it, give it to one copy to the Republicans, one copy to the Democrats. It's how it's worked forever. But the Democrats have decided that only they can keep the transcripts, and we cannot have the transcripts unless we want to go into one of their rooms and have one of their staffers oversee us with no notes.
So if you are a member of Congress and a member of the Intelligence Committee,
Impeachment Committee.
and the HPSCI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Impeachment,
Yes.
And you want to see this transcript of this hearing that your committee did, you have to go to a room and examine a physical printout of a transcript while a Democratic staffer chaperones you the entire time?
Correct.
And that's the only access that you can have to
Correct.
this?
Totally unprecedented. Because, typically you would want to go through the transcript, be able to make notes and figure out if, is this actually what the witness said? You want to go back and listen to the tapes, that sort of thing. And then, the surprising thing is that nearly every day, they leak out something that happened in those hearings.
Well, let's say...
And the media knows this. I mean, they're writing about it. They're writing about what people said.
Let's say one had a photographic memory, and you could just go out and recount long sections of dialogue from this. Could you do that?
No.
What would be the penalty for doing it?
Well, they'd file an ethics charge against you. And it is, in House rules, if you take a deposition, you can't go out and talk about the deposition.
Okay. Even though...
Or can't go out and, say exactly what was said in the deposition.
Even though with the deposition of William Taylor, which you're right, Congressman Lieu came out and said that this was incredibly damaging to the president, said it while it was going on, became all the news. And then magically we saw the release of a detailed 15-page statement, unchallenged. And this is released, it becomes the basis of all the headlines, all the news stories, and it is Taylor's account of events, but he testified for 10 hours and presumably was asked some questions, and we know nothing about that.
Right, so someone leaked his opening testimony, which you can do, from what I understand, if the witness himself wants to put it out there. But I would just encourage anybody to go and read the open testimony. I can talk about that. It looks like a bitter bureaucrat who was upset that he was being circumvented, and him and his buddies were all mad about what was happening with the Ukraine portfolio by the Trump administration. And last time I checked, State Department bureaucrats are not elected. The President of the United States is elected by the people, and he has the authority to put whoever he wants in Ukraine to oversee that portfolio for the United States government.
Here again, one of our questions here is why not go to court to divulge the identity of the whistleblower? And I might, and they point out that the Democrats have gone to court to release grand jury information from the Mueller probe. Why not go to court to challenge something like this? Is there any recourse for Republicans here?
No, if you're talking about the internal
secrecy
process.
we were just talking about.
Yeah, but you have to go just a footnote on 6E. 6E is a product of the judicial branch, not of the House of Representatives, right? So it's the judicial branch and the executive branch.
6E is the law mandating grand jury secrecy.
Grand jury secrecy is absolutely, it is one of the first of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not, as a prosecutor. By the way, the same thing, Mr. Chairman, a witness before the grand jury can go out and hold a press conference and lie, which is what happened all
Sidney
the time.
Blumenthal did that with you.
All the time. So we should have stopped calling Sidney Blumenthal. So he can go out and lie before the to the media about what happened, and he was asked this, and he was asked this, all entirely made up. I mean, what is the morality of someone who is under oath in the grand jury and then walks out and just blatantly lies about it? Happily, there is justice. Because, and this is all in the public domain, I'm not violating 6E, it's all been revealed. On his third time in, Sidney Blumenthal got a tongue lashing from the foreperson of the grand jury in the District of Columbia. How dare you go out and misrepresent what happened here? I don't think that was a particularly, shall I say, hard moment for Sidney Blumenthal. So his conscience, I think, is seared from what we've seen of his activity over these decades in the service of Hillary Rodham Clinton. But the point is, there's nothing to be done. You're just stuck. I do want to come back to the whistleblower. You know someone who can now speak to all this, and that is the Inspector General. The Inspector General can, in fact, I think, make a determination that the whistleblower, in light of the whistleblower having had communication with the Intelligence Committee staff, waived, as in WAIVED, any anonymity that he otherwise would have had.
Now, we do have to wrap up now, so I just wanted to get from both of you a sense. I mean, we're in an extraordinarily different place than we were the 1st of September. Just amazingly different. Where do you think we'll be by New Year's?
Well, the Democrats have got themselves into a position where, as we talked about earlier, they're in a catch-22 position, right? Classic, that if they don't impeach, they're going to completely demoralize their base. If they impeach, then they're going to, I think, pay a big price. But I don't think they have a choice but to do. And I say this, I'm just saying for them politically, which is how they see everything, they're going to run impeachment as far as they can get. I mean, the only thing that would possibly stop it would be, some type of real bombshell that would come out about the whistleblower or any of these diplomats or any of these witnesses that they're bringing in. That could possibly derail it. That would actually save them from themselves. But without something like that happening, I think this is just on the fuse has been lit, and they have no choice politically. I mean, gosh, every one of their Democratic candidates in the primary, except for the Russian asset Tulsi Gabbard, has called for impeachment. Even the future candidates like Hillary Clinton have already called for impeachment.
Ken?
Impeachment has had this sense of inevitability. And impeachment has simply been in search of a rationale. Before a special counsel was appointed, pretty impressive people, Lawrence Tribe of the Harvard Law School, were calling for the impeachment of the president for violation of the Emoluments Clause, which is a pretty insubstantial, frivolous kind of thing when you look at the history of the Emoluments Clause. We have a business person named Donald Trump who has these hotel interests and so forth, but the business is turned over to the family. We know all that. So then we have the Russian collusion. Oh, then we have to have a special counsel appointed in light of the testimony of James Comey in March before the House Intelligence Committee, March of 2017. And then the chairman has put it very well. Then we were all looking ahead, right, to the Bob Mueller report, and then that released around Easter, and then comes the eagerly anticipated Mueller testimony. I thought you handled that brilliantly, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think that's an applause occasion in July. And you could just see how, even though the music coming out of the Democrats was, oh, this is devastating and so forth, you knew that the show had flopped. So we needed something else, and then here we are in Ukraine land.
And here we
so
are.
Impeachment, I think, has been a serious effort to, I don't mean morally serious, but a politically serious effort to impeach, I think has had this sort of historical inevitability, and so we just have to win, period.
I know.
If I can, Byron, just because I know you're going to close out, but through all of this chaos, and it's embarrassing for the country, and I think it's dangerous for the country, horrible precedents being set. With all that, there are occasions of things that just stick in your mind that I will never get out of my mind from inside the Democrat Starr chamber down in the basement of the Capitol. And that is the other day before the storming incident was to see Matt Gaetz. I don't know if you guys have probably seen him. He's a very funny guy. But to see him, so he goes, this was the second time he did this, demanding to be part of the process. And he went and he sat right by Adam Schiff in the room. I mean, within he was sitting right here.
Personal space.
And he looked like he was he was what's the old cartoon, like the cat when it eats, Tweety Bird? He was just sitting there. I will never get that out of my mind. And Schiff was just fuming. Like, you could just see, he wasn't saying anything. Gates was just sitting there. So through all this, there still is some humor. We're gonna have to, but it's gonna have to be a cartoon drawing because there's no pictures of it.
The new face of the resistance. Listen, I know a lot of you have things to say about impeachment, other questions about impeachment. I am going to actually be talking about impeachment today at 4:30 after our other sessions. 4:30 over in the River Room on the other side of the building, and I hope you'll join us there. That will be a good session, I think. And I really want to thank both of you, Chairman in Exile and Judge. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking part.
Thank you.